This video was brought to you by my patrons. You fall in love, you confess, and you're bound to one another. They talk about how wonderful it is, but nothing could be further from the truth. Even in romantic relationships, there exists a clear power dynamic. The exploiter and the exploited, the master and the servant, the winner and the loser. If you wish to live a life of luxury, you cannot allow yourself to be the loser. Love is war. The first to fall in love loses. This is a story of Kaguya-sama, Love is War, and why I believe to have revolutionized the rom-com genre. But to fully explain why that is, we need to take a deep dive into what came before it, to not only the genre of rom-com itself, but also so many other aspects that it took inspiration from, and led this series to capture so many people's hearts. Romantic comedies, also known as rom-coms, have existed since almost the beginning of cinema itself. It's known to be a subgenre of comedy and slice-of-life fiction, which normally focuses on a romantic story that deals with love in a light and humorous way. It's hard to say when it first came about, but there were two movies that came out in 1924 that fall in line with this definition: Buster Keaton's Sherlock Jr. and Harold Lloyd's Girl Shy. And thus, a new era began. One where we let ourselves place in their shoes. One where we so desperately wanted to find something similar. One where we couldn't help but feel elevated by these simple yet heartwarming stories. And as time went by, this genre would also start to crawl its way into animation. It would have an enormous rise in the 80s thanks to an author called Rumiko Takahashi, one who made so many manga that revolved around the idea of two characters that should be together, but for some reason never were. Whether it was because one of the characters pretended to not love the other, or both of them being just as stubborn. She made rom-coms mainstream in Japan. She brought a whole new aspect to slice of life. And it was with her creations that the appeal of waifus and tsunderes would gain immense popularity in the manga and anime worlds. Since then, we've had so many different stories in Japanese animation to take full advantage of these elements and push the genre even further. And that's how we arrive at Kaguya-sama, Love is War. So, what did it do that was different than everything that came before it? Well, to explain that, I need to talk about two things. Aka Akasaka had always wanted to become a mangaka. He had this desire to tell a story since his high school days, one that would eventually become his life's work, and that was Instant Bullets. What? That's right, Kaguya-sama is not his life's work, but rather it was this manga that told this odd yet compelling story of a young boy who was fed up of the world he lived in and wanted it to be destroyed. He never thought the manga would be successful, and the truth is, it never really was. It unfortunately got axed and he had to rush the ending. Afterwards, he had set his eyes on a new fantasy story that revolved around a game of death. But his editor wanted something that could become more popular, and at the time, the magazine Young Jump did not have a rom-com series. That's when everything lined up. All of the failures that Akasaka had went through, all of the pressures from his editor, the need to make something that wasn't entirely in his control, brought about one of the most creative stories ever made. This was a story between a teenage girl and boy who loved each other. However, because of their status and pride, they would never want to admit that to the other person. For them, the one who confessed first would lose. They did not want to concede their power. In other words, we were witnessing two tsunderes who didn't want to admit their feelings to one another, just like we had seen so many times before. But what set it apart was how this was conveyed. For both Kaguya and Miyuki, we were essentially observing a battle between two people. But instead of fists being thrown at each other, it was all mind games that would analyze each and every situation, every movement, every word to figure out how they could come out on top. And this led to some incredible tense moments between the two, whether it was trying to get the other to invite them to a movie or trying to get the other to offer them food without asking them directly. It's no surprise that one of the biggest influences for Akasaka was the most well-known Battle of the Minds manga ever to be created, and that is Death Note, which is precisely why this feels so refreshing. It's not that the Battle of the Minds is anything new. We've seen this countless times in other stories before. But the reason why Kaguya-sama does something that has never been done before is precisely because it infused that into the rom-com genre. It's not like you're rooting for one versus the other, but rather you are seeing the ridiculous efforts that each take to not want to admit something as simple as, yeah, I like you. As a viewer, I'm not even that concerned to see them confess. I just want to see more of their situations unfold and get to know each of them better. And A1 Pictures does a brilliant job with its adaptation and execution. This studio, known for their work on Your Lie in April, the first two seasons of Seven Deadly Sins, and more recently with 86, and so much more, accomplished the impossible. Not only does each scene stand out with its direction, but the use of its many art forms is just astounding. Whether it's the use of sounds and music, the god-tier voice acting,
さようなら藤原さん。
or the use of visuals that just pulls you in more and more to really accentuate what they are thinking and feeling in each moment. And no more perfect of an example can be found than in episode 1 of season 3. First of all, it does something that I've been wanting to see for quite a long time, and that is the use of modern communication as a means to let us get to know the characters more. Phones have always been something that I find fascinating in the world of the seventh art. Whether it's its use in the opening scene in Once Upon a Time in America, of having a phone ring constantly that feels like an eternity, or more recently, the use of it in Violet Evergarden, the movie, that perfectly showcases why new forms of communication can be essential in connecting people more. However, with time, with technology advancing so much and communication constantly changing, I was yet to truly see films and stories take this to a level that I consider to be truly innovative by today's standards. You have the example of the Sherlock series bringing text to the forefront of the imagery and convey to us conversations in a very smart way. But I wanted more. I wanted something that really conveyed to me what texting was really all about. And once again, as it's happened so many times before, it would be the world of Japanese animation to do that for me. Since Kaguya is technologically illiterate thanks to the isolation she has lived most of her life, she has no understanding of how people really communicate in this day and age. So when she finally gets a smartphone for the first time, she finds herself in a brand new situation, finally using apps like Line to talk with her friends and, well, Miyuki himself. But this would also mean that she was about to enter into unknown territory. And when Miyuki sends her a text, that's when it leads to one of the most dramatic circumstances she has ever been in. She reads his text and is so happy about it, but she chooses not to reply back. At least not right away. She doesn't want to seem needy, but her assistant Hayasaka notices that Kaguya's been looking at the message for 2 full hours, until our protagonist replies.
メッセージをいつ見たかバレてるわけでもありませんし。え?
As soon as this happened, a realization occurred to me. What if this episode was going to talk about read receipts? Could it be possible? Something as futile as knowing when somebody has read your texts. Or maybe even read texts without actually opening the chat and thus not sending a read receipt to the other person. Would I finally witness this being dissected as if it were the deepest thing imaginable? There's no way. And then it happened.
もしかしてかぐや様も
既読というシステムに気づいてないのでは。
I couldn't believe it. Finally, there was an art form actually using this aspect of communication as a means to further develop the character's story, stakes, everything you could possibly imagine. All thanks to Akasaka's brilliant mind and A1 Pictures doing an insane job at adapting this into anime form. Kaguya had no idea what read receipts were, but what's worse is that Miyuki sends her a new text, and because she left the chat window open, she ends up reading it instantly, leading to Miyuki realizing that she might indeed have had her chat open this entire time. It instantly reminded me of Hitchcock's famous bomb theory.
4 people are sitting around a table talking about baseball, whatever you like. 5 minutes of it, very dull. Suddenly, a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience there is a bomb under that table and will go off in 5 minutes. Well, the whole emotion of the audience is totally different because you've given them that information that in 5 minutes' time that bomb will go off.
And that's exactly what happens here. In fact, it's not just that the audience knows, it's everyone in this scene but Kaguya. And so, the whole time, we feel like something is about to go off. We feel as if Kaguya's life is in complete jeopardy, all because she has no idea that Miyuki knows that she has indeed read the text. And the more the scene goes on, the more we feel the tension, the more we feel the mind games, the more we realize that Miyuki is about to do the final blow. And when he calls her, that's when the bomb is revealed to our protagonist. Kaguya looks at her assistant with absolute disdain. You feel it in the imagery shown, in the dramatic operatic music playing in the background, in the colors used to accentuate the devilish look that our protagonist has. She realizes that this can only lead to one conclusion, that Kaguya indeed has feelings for Miyuki. And just as Miyuki is about to ask this to her, Hayasaka manages to create an excuse strong enough to leave her off the hook. This whole scene perfectly demonstrates what this anime is about. Not just in terms of its story and premise, but also through its extraordinary execution by A1 Pictures. This is one of the main reasons why this anime is able to be so creative in its storytelling. But it doesn't stop here. As I mentioned before, there was another aspect that made this anime revolutionize the rom-com genre, and that was thanks to how much influence it takes from everything else that came before it, or rather, the not so subtle pop culture references it makes. And to talk about this, we need to go back to talking about Rumiko Takahashi, more specifically, one of her most influential creations. Just like many manga and anime of the 80s and 90s, Urusei Yatsura was essential in paving the way for the anime we have now. Not just with waifus and tsunderes, but also in terms of slice of life. It's thought that it was the first one to do that, but due to its popularity in the 80s, it was impossible not to shy away from its impact. And since the story revolved around teenagers, you couldn't help but feel attached to some of its moments. I had the opportunity to watch reruns of it during my teen years, and I had never seen anything like it. But one thing I never truly realized at the time was how much it would reference so much of pop culture. The best comparison I can make to this is with The Simpsons. Yes, Urusei Yatsura and The Simpsons have almost nothing in common. One is about the nonsense emotions surrounding teenage love and life. The other is a satire on the issues of the average American family in the early 90s. But what they do share in common is just how much they would use other forms of media and prominent works of art to elevate its comedy, nonsense, and satire. You could tell that the people involved in making each show were just having an absolute blast, and both shows would have an enormous impact in what would come later. The Simpsons led to other animated shows like Family Guy and South Park to exist, and thus pushed the envelope even further. And Urusei Yatsura, well, it led to this. Whether intentionally or not, so many characters and stories have been massively influenced by what this manga and anime did in the 80s, and so its pop culture aspect would also creep its way into what would come later. Lucky Star, The Melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya, Konosuba, and so many others. All of these had enormous success at the time of their release, and all of them are notorious for its incredible satire and pop culture references. And that includes Kaguya-sama, Love is War. It's another proof that with time, something shows up that ends up taking that mantle of parodying so many things that preceded it and ends up being so poignant and fresh to anyone who is currently watching it. It references shonen, shoujo, specific scenes from anime like Bakemonogatari, intro sequences to classic shows like the Mission Impossible series, emblematic imagery from the Ace Attorney games, or even something as subtle as the most iconic page of the Ashita no Joe manga. You even hear the sound of a bell ringing as if it were indicating either the start or the end of a boxing round. It's just brilliant. It's literally doing what all of these other shows did, but in a way that feels new because of the premise of the show. You can tell the writers, animators, voice actors, everyone is having so much fun making this. But of course, just like every other anime that came before it, and just like Urusei Yatsura, it is able to remind us of what truly matters in these types of stories. And that is, whilst all of this initially pulls us in, whilst we can laugh at all the gags and references juxtaposed with the absolute chaos of the battle of the minds that each character goes through, it is the slice of life nature of the story that makes us stay. Because the truth is, the more you get to know them, the more they start to showcase who they truly are underneath, and thus heartwarming and touching moments eventually start to happen, not just with our protagonists, but also other characters that have clearly gone through many things in previous years, slowly revealing that this is indeed a grounded slice of life story that makes it easy to connect with each of them. Whether it's the frustration of not having the other person reply to a text message, or incidents that has happened to us where we have tried to do good but everyone sees it as something else entirely. At the end of season 2 episode 11, I was so mad, so angry, because all I wanted was justice for Ishigami, merely due to the fact that I've been in his shoes before, having people look at you in a completely different way than they were supposed to, and it causes you so much pain, as if you were the one who did something wrong, that maybe you're the problem, that maybe there is nothing you can do. Which is why it was so satisfying to hear him say, "Urusei baka." I remember specifically watching this episode, and just as it was about to show his past, I immediately thought it was going to be something really cliche, that it was going to be your typical backstory drama that we've seen countless times in other anime. But I was so incredibly wrong. By the end, I found myself tweeting about this episode in such an enraged manner, as if I were Ishigami, as if I had just gone through that ordeal, and all I wanted was justice for my boy. Yep, I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. And the reason I did is also because I was in need of something like this in the first place. Let's be honest, we all have searched for love in one way or another. We have either never found it, or have come across it and maybe even lost it. However, Kaguya-sama was the rom-com we needed. We needed to laugh at the absurdity of it. We needed to simply let ourselves enjoy the moment. How ridiculous it is to spend so much time thinking about what the other person is thinking. How laughable it is to wait for the other person to reply back. And how foolish it was for us to let our insecurities take over us in certain moments. I laughed so hard watching this series, these characters, the situations they put themselves in, but also how endearing each of them were. This anime grounded me and taught me not to take things so seriously. I can't really explain to you why or how, but it did. I guess when you see yourself from afar, you are able to notice how meaningless it all really is. And I don't mean that I don't appreciate love in any way. On the contrary, for anyone who knows me, you know how much I enjoy understanding everything about the concept of love. You can watch the countless videos I've made on my channel that clearly showcase that. But maybe it's not worth to spend so much time obsessing about all of these little things. And to be perfectly honest, this show also made me feel less alone. Like, I'm not the only idiot worrying about these sort of things. And so, I was not only laughing at this series, I was also laughing at myself. And that's okay. That was the whole point of Kaguya-sama. It wasn't just nonsense for the sake of it, but rather we could see ourselves in these characters that pointed its fingers to us, letting us know how scary it is to showcase who we really are. Letting us know that the more we expose ourselves, the more hurt we can feel. How many times have we told someone we liked them and they didn't say anything back? How many times have we voiced ourselves and not be listened? It hurts, and so we don't want to be placed in that situation ever again. But it's also true that the more we expose ourselves, the more we can connect with someone in the first place. It would only take a second for Kaguya and Miyuki to talk about their feelings, a second to solve all of their issues, a second to be honest with themselves. And that's the beauty of this anime. Whilst it shows how painful it is to be vulnerable, it also shows us that if we are surrounded by the right people, it can finally let us be who we truly are. So, no matter the outcome, no matter if we find happiness or get hurt, at least we learned to be more honest. Not just with the people we care about, but especially with ourselves, with you and me. We are initially told that the first to fall in love loses, but we eventually realize that in reality, that couldn't be further from the truth. Thank you for watching my video. Kaguya-sama really is becoming one of the greats, and it was so much fun doing all of the research. I want to thank all of my patrons for supporting me thus far. I can't thank you enough. I truly love making each video, and so for me to keep doing this, your support is crucial. And thus, if you want to see more content like this, I would be forever grateful if you could support with any amount you can. It would also mean a lot to me if you could subscribe and hit that like button. And in the meantime, why not check out some of the other videos I've made so far. Thanks again, and I'll see you in the next video.